What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Moving to Florida show. I am your host, Judson, joined by my co-host here, Mohit Badlani. And we also have a very special guest joining us today. Daniel Bernard Esquire is an attorney and partner at Twomey Latham. He practices law in New York, Florida, and New Jersey, and specializes in estate planning for snowbirds. As a matter of fact, he wrote a book with just that title, Estate Planning for Snowbirds. So he joins us today on the Moving to Florida show to discuss what you need to do to plan ahead when you decide to make Florida your second home. With that, Daniel, thank you so much for joining us.
Guys, thanks for having me. Really a big fan of the podcast and excited to be here and talk about estate planning for snowbirds.
Absolutely. Well, I have one big question before we get into that. So you've listened to the show before. You know we like to ask all of our guests what made you move to Florida, but you haven't moved to Florida yet. So what's the deal?
Why am I holding out? Well, I have an established practice in New York that's between the New York and Florida snowbirds, and it's true. I could just work it the other way. I could work the people when they're down in Florida rather than up in New York. But I've got young kids, and I'll give you the 100% honest answer. I have a wife, and wives control where we live. So
true that. Happy wife, happy life.
That's it.
Okay, fair. That's fair enough. Okay, so, gosh, I don't even know, where do we need to start on this? I think we've mentioned before, one of our very first episodes, we gave a bunch of Florida words and phrases, and one of those was a snowbird. So if you could quickly maybe just tell us, for those who are uninformed, what is a snowbird?
Sure. So snowbirds are people who split their time between a cold place and a warm place. So typically snowbirds will spend the summer months in a more northern region, whether that's, for me, that's New Yorkers, but I'm sure you guys know Florida, you get a lot of Canadian snowbirds, you get a lot of snowbirds from the Midwest and Minnesota, a lot of Massachusetts snowbirds towards the west coast of Florida. So it's basically people that they don't like extremes. So they don't like the cold of the north in the winter, and they don't like the very, very hot weather you guys are having right now in Florida. They like the more moderate hot weather that we have up here. And I like to, as far as when it comes to New York people, I like to start off, I quote Jerry Seinfeld all the time. He had a joke that said, my parents didn't want to move to Florida, but they turned 60, and that's the law. So it's sometimes when you're up here in New York, that's the way it seems, that as people start getting a little bit older and they retire, they just don't want to shovel snow anymore, and they join you guys.
It's also bad for their bones. That's awesome. That's awesome. So tell us a little bit about how you can help snowbirds. How do you help them? How did you get into that niche?
Sure.
Or niche?
So my firm's been around for 50 years, and 50 years next year. And as all firms get older, the client base gets older. So it's kind of like the Jerry Seinfeld joke I just told. The clients are getting older, and they get older in New York. They start moving to Florida. So my firm thought, hey, it'd be really helpful if we had a guy that was admitted to practice in Florida and could help out on this growing snowbird base. So I happened to be the guy. Spent 2 days in Tampa in July 2017 at the beautiful convention center, taking the Florida bar exam. And after I did that, I really just started to focus on the issues that are unique to snowbirds, whether that be, in my case, the New York, Florida snowbirds, but really anyone that is dividing their time between two different states. And I think there's a lot of people just don't realize that it has an effect on their estate plan, and that it can create a lot of headaches for their next of kin, their heirs, when they pass away. So I really like to do stuff like this, and that's why I wrote the book, to just get that information out there and let people know that, listen, you've created a little bit of a headache for your heirs, but it's very easily mitigated, and we can help you mitigate that. And so the reason why, that begs the question, well, what kind of headaches am I creating for my heirs, right? I mean, I just bought a house in Florida. This doesn't feel like a headache. They said they're going to come visit me. This feels like a benefit, right?
Right.
But, and I think it is a benefit. I agree. But the issue is, not to get too technical, and I don't want to get into the weeds, on the Constitution, but basically the U.S. Constitution has the state's rights aspects, and one state can't tell another state, here's what happens to property in your state. So New York can't tell Florida, hey, this guy died a New York resident, and his will says this happened, so transfer the property to his kids. So what happens when people die and they own property in both New York and Florida, or Florida and any other state, is that their family has to do a probate in both New York and Florida. And probate is just to me, it's like almost, it's not 4 letters, but it feels like a 4-letter word, because it's just such a headache, and it's time consuming, and it's costly for people's heirs. And having to do that twice is a real pain in the neck for people. And they're very disappointed when I tell them, hey, not only do you have to do this whole probate process in New York that's going to be time-consuming and it's going to be costly, but then we're going to have to do it in Florida as well. And that can be avoided by doing what I call proper Snowbird estate planning, which is, rather than owning your house individually in your own name, as most of us own our houses with a spouse or by ourselves, you transfer that house into a trust. And by transferring the house into a trust, you avoid the probate process, and rather than the court having to have any jurisdiction over your estate, the trustee can act almost immediately after your death and manage the assets in the trust and save your heirs a lot of time, money, and headaches.
I was reviewing the website, and it looks like there are kind of some different, what you've put in different tiers of estate planning for snowbirds. Is that because there are different, it matters if you spend more time in one state or another, or what's the most important part of that?
Sure. So when I talk about estate planning for snowbirds, I typically talk about it in 3 tiers. So the tier 1 snowbird is the person that is, just thinking about, hey, should I move to Florida? They probably just started listening to your podcast, and they maybe haven't bought property in Florida yet, and so they don't have that probate issue that I was talking about, right? Because they maybe still own property in just one state. So for the tier 1 snowbirds, which is everybody, that's people, whether you own property in 2 states, you rent in 2 states, it's having the basic estate planning documents in place in both New York and Florida. So that's the basic documents for someone to make a medical decision for you if you become incapacitated, someone to manage your finances if you become incapacitated, and for compassionate care at end of life. So those documents are called healthcare proxy, living will, power of attorney in New York. In Florida, they're called Declaration of Healthcare Surrogate, Florida Declaration, and Durable Power of Attorney. So the reason why I recommend people have that for New York and Florida is that, again, we have the full faith and credit clause of the Constitution that says, hey, just because this was a Florida document, New York has to accept it. But New York is used to seeing the New York form, Florida is used to seeing the Florida form, so it'll save you some time and headaches when these documents need to be used if you have the form for that state. And you're allowed to have the forms for multiple states. You have to match up that they have the same people appointed, but you're allowed to do that. So that's tier 1. I recommend that to everyone if you're spending significant time in 2 different states. And by significant time, I mean if you're spending at least 4 or 5 months in Florida, it's probably a good idea to have it for Florida plus your home state. Tier 2 is basically what I just said about the trust planning. So that's you've committed to Florida, you've bought a house in Florida, and you've also won't fully commit to Florida, and you still keep that house in New York or New Jersey or Canada, wherever else. That's where the trust planning is very important so that your heirs have a very easy time and don't have to deal with that Florida probate and that New York probate. Tier 3 is when we get into taxes. So taxes for you guys, you're like, what's taxes? We don't pay taxes in Florida. So Florida doesn't have a state level tax. So Florida is always willing to accept residents. I mean, on the state level, right? You don't care. Yeah, the more the merrier. Get a Florida driver's license. It doesn't really matter. And every state's willing to accept new residents. The question is, are they willing to let residents go? So the high tax states like New York, we might accept when people come here, but New York really doesn't like to let people leave tax-wise. So New York will still claim that people are residents here, even if they don't spend all their time here, because they'll say you either spend too much time here, that's 183 days, or they'll say, hey, you're domiciled here, which means New York is still your home, regardless of where you spend all your time. This is still your home. And not to get in the weeds on it, but they're basically saying that New York is the place you always intend to return to. So the best example of this is people that join the military and maybe they go to Afghanistan or wherever for a year, 2 years. New York would still say you're a New York resident, even though you lived in Afghanistan for a year, because you never planned on living in Afghanistan forever. You always intended to return to New York. So they will do the same thing to Snowbirds and say, no, you really still live here. And the big thing with that is that, unlike Florida, New York has a state level income tax. It's up to close to 9% at the highest level, and we have a state level estate tax. So, which is up to 16% at the highest level. So when we get into the higher net worth people, which a lot of times are our snowbirds because they can afford to own property in 2 different states, it's important to think about the tax considerations and think about residency, because if you're a Florida resident, you don't have to pay an estate tax. And if you're a New York resident, you may have to pay an estate tax depending on the value of your assets at death. So Tier 1 is definitely everybody that spends time in 2 states. Tier 2 is most people, because most people do end up buying that second property. And Tier 3 is for our high net worth individuals. And when I say high net worth, we're talking about taxable estate in New York, which is essentially $6 million and up.
Gotcha. So you keep it under $6 million, you'll be okay.
Exactly. Well, spend everything before you die, and you'll be fine.
Yeah. You don't have to worry about it later on.
So, Daniel, I'm also thinking, this is the Moving to Florida show, and I'm sure we do have a lot of prospective snowbirds that listen to the show. But we do also have a lot of people that want to, make Florida home, and they're not keeping any, they're all in on Florida. But these people are going to need those documents you mentioned as well, right?
Yeah, so that's a great point. So even if you're not a snowbird, say you've decided I'm all in on Florida, New York in the winter and summer isn't for me, and I'm a tough guy. I can handle the Florida summers. Then it's still probably a good idea to have your estate plan reviewed. And I would say the biggest aspect to that is that when I do estate planning for the snowbirds or planning for people that are just, I'm going to be 100% Florida, I have people like that too, there's different provisions in those documents. One of them being that Florida has the Homestead exemption that a lot of states don't have. So you want to make sure that if you're going to have a trust that was, say you have a trust that was created in New York to avoid New York probate, now you're moving to Florida, you want to make sure that trust gets updated to include that Florida homestead language, because as you guys know, that Florida homestead exemption is very valuable. And for people moving to Florida, you're not going to get it right away. You have to be in Florida for a year before you can get it. So typically I'll design your trust, transfer your property into the trust, and then you can make your application for the homestead exemption after a year. Typically, the county will send you a letter in the mail that says, hey, this house is in a trust. We want to see the whole trust to make sure that you have the appropriate homestead language. And what I tell my clients is, don't worry about that. It sounds scary. It sounds like you screwed something up. You didn't. Send me the letter, and we fax to I've probably faxed one to almost every county in Florida at this point. the relevant pages of the trust, and then you get the homestead exemption. So it's pretty seamless to do that, and that's a really great point for the people that do fully commit to Florida.
Yeah, absolutely, and you're absolutely right. The homestead exemption is very valuable. It gives you a discount on taxes, but also limits how much your taxes can go up each year, which is, especially in this world we're living in today, very important.
The property tax is key, but you have the creditor protections as well. I mean, you've got some great stories about some infamous people that got to keep their place in Florida when they've lost almost everything else.
Al Capone from Chicago.
You got Al Capone. You got, I think O.J. Simpson benefited from the homestead exemption, and then I think the baseball commissioner before Bud Selig, I don't remember his name, but he had, I think, a multi-million-dollar home in Florida. When he lost everything else, he was able to keep that house. So it's a quite valuable thing to have. So people in Florida definitely need to take advantage of that if they can.
Yep, absolutely.
And it's just important to note one more thing on the homestead, that Snowbirds, you really can only take, it's for Florida, homestead exemption is for Florida residents only. So it's not for, which I'm sure you guys tell people all the time, it's not for the Snowbirds. If you're a Snowbird, you have to be a Florida resident to get it. And what that means for people coming from other states is if you're getting any kind of homestead-like exemption in another state. For example, in New York, we have what's called a star exemption, where it doesn't give us the creditor benefits and protection, but it gives us tax relief. You're going to lose that tax relief in the other state because it's for residents only. So sometimes you have to weigh, do you want the homestead exemption or an exemption you were getting somewhere else? And you have to actually become a Florida resident to get that exemption.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Hi, I'm Kate Casey, an unscripted TV expert. 3 times a week, I interview the talent, directors, producers, and hosts of television's most popular reality shows, docuseries, and documentaries. I get all the behind-the-scenes stories. I cover everything from The Bachelor, Selling Sunset, and Real Housewives to Tinder Swindler, The Last Dance, and Secrets of Playboy. Join me as I ask all the questions that you want asked. And best of all, I'm the most trusted source on what to watch every week. I will give you a guide on everything from true crime and sports to competition, calling from all streaming and cable networks. The best guests, the best shows and series. Reality Life with Kate Casey.
Very, very good point. Are there, I'm curious if are there particular time frames where you would go, okay, we have to stay in, Florida, like you said, 183 days a year or something like that? Is there a particular time frame for each of these states?
Well, New York is the 183 days rule. We have the domicile where they say, listen, you still live here, we don't care. And you have and even if they say, okay, we agree, you moved to Florida, that's your home, they'll say you spent too much time here. You spent 183 days here, so we're taxing you as if you're a resident. Florida doesn't really have that because Florida doesn't have the state level. So Florida basically says if you have said you moved here and you've been here for a year and you have a Florida driver's license and you're registered to vote here, they'll give you the homestead exemption. You just have to certify that you're a resident of Florida and that you're not getting that exemption anywhere else. Florida doesn't necessarily have a time period of how long you have to stay in Florida. It's just really residency.
Right. We're a little more laid back about it. That's what I'm hearing.
Florida's, an amazing state in my opinion because it's almost laid back about everything, but it's really not though. It's very organized in some aspects for, I would say much more organized than New York in many aspects, one of them being deeds. I can probably pull up the deeds to your houses within 5 minutes. Online, get the deed you signed, get the deed whoever you bought the house from, the deed they signed. Within 5 minutes, no problem. It's the exact deed, right? In New York, I can't do that. We don't have any of our deeds online. I have to go down to the county center and have someone copy the deed and then bring the physical copy back to me. It's a pain in the neck. And then Florida, when I want to record a deed, it's like, what, $20 to record a deed down there? So the county I'm in New York, it's $395. The next county over is about $800. And then when you get into the New York City, the 5 boroughs, it's even more money. So, and we don't have our deeds online, so I don't know what they're doing with the extra money. I'm like, $20 and you got all your deeds online. This is crazy.
Easy access.
But yeah, so
right?
I think that's fantastic. I think it's a great system, and I'm sure it took them a long time to scan in all those deeds. I just love on the website, not to go on a tangent on the website, but on the deeds, but that they'll say, sorry, we only have the deeds from 1900 to present. Like, oh no, I was really looking for that 1800 deed. You guys are slacking.
That's too funny. So as an attorney that takes care of a lot of snowbirds, I'm sure you've gone through so many different types of situations and scenarios. What are some of the scenarios that you've been through and that you can speak about?
Sure. So the typical situation is I'll do seminars a lot, or I'll speak to people will see my advertisements, and they come in and they're just like, I don't understand why this is such a hassle. And I explain to them, listen, you have the double probate. This is going to cost your family a lot of money, and they're happy to make that change. Then there can be the best clients are the ones who have unfortunately been through the probate process, because they see how much of a pain in the neck it is. So the unfortunate side of this is when I see people that come in where they say, oh yeah, it's a simple estate, it's just me and my brother, and my mom had a couple, not less than $1 million, nothing crazy. I'm like, okay, let's go through the assets. Well, she has a house here, she has this, she has that. Oh, and my parents were snowbirding for 20 years, so they own a condo in Delray Beach, but she didn't go there for like the last 3 years. I'm like, okay, now you're looking at 2 probates here. What are you talking about? We gotta do a probate for Florida. Well, it's only 1 property. Yeah, it's the same formalities. So, and unfortunately, I see that all the time. And to me, the worst one I see is at least when people come to me, I'll do the probates at the same time. So it's the costs are unfortunately more because we're doing double the work, right? We're doing for New York and Florida, the same amount of work. Yeah. But the time frame can be similar because we're doing them essentially at the same time. The unfortunate ones I see are the ones where the people went through the full New York probate, and then at the end of it, they were told, oh, well, I can't help you with that Florida property. You're going to have to go to a Florida attorney for that. And now they've just spent a year probating in New York. They think they're done, and now they have to start all over for this 1 property in Florida. So, and this can just all, I can't say it enough, this can just all be avoided by doing proper estate planning. And we can, the courts have enough to do with the siblings that can't get along and stuff like that. Oh, yeah. So these kinds of estate plans are, these kinds of estates, we can keep them out of the court system and make everything flow a lot easier. And I'll say one more benefit to the planning is what we've seen recently with the interest rates going up, right? So when you have a trust that owns your house, the trustee can essentially take over as trustee the day after you pass away. They can enter into a contract to sell that property immediately. They're the trustee. They're in charge. So they can sell your house much faster. Whereas when you have to do a probate, that person has no authority to do anything until the court appoints them. So in this environment where we've seen the interest rates going really crazy, what's happened, and this has happened a couple times in our office, is you have a buyer that we tell, listen, we're waiting to become executor. Once we're executor, we can close. That takes 3 to 6 months in where I am right now because they're very backed up with COVID. And over that 3 to 6 months, the interest rate has changed. And now the buyer who can afford the house can't afford the house anymore. And the best case scenario for you is they can still afford the house, and it's just a very angry person at closing because their mortgage payment's like $300 more a month. which to me, when you're buying a house, typically you're not, typically we're pushing it, a little bit. So another $300 a month isn't insignificant. But the worst case scenario is they get denied for the mortgage because they just can't afford that other $300 a month, and now you're starting all over again, having to remarket your house, and you're absorbing all of those carrying costs for the time that you're waiting to close. So it can really cost people not just time but a lot of money too.
Yeah, that's a great point about the carrying costs. It's not just the cost of the probate and that time. We went through probate a little while back. My wife did with her grandmother, and she was the executor, and she had to deal with all of that, and it was such a headache, and it took well over a year. So absolutely, I see what you mean there, and yeah, there's carrying costs and a vacant home, and Mo can tell you as well. When you have a vacant home, nobody's living in it. They go into disrepair quite quickly. So yeah, that is a concern too. So yeah, I can definitely see the benefit here. Daniel, this estate planning, is this something that's just terribly expensive, or what are they really looking at?
I wouldn't say it's terribly expensive. I've done estate planning where it comes in the around $1,000, and I've done estate planning where it's been 20,000 plus. It's really dependent upon your assets, the kind of plan that you want to set up. For most people, this isn't going to be stuff that breaks the bank, honestly. It's going to be, if you have a plan in place already, it's really just updating what you already have. And if you don't have a plan in place, it's setting up a solid foundation of a plan that is going to ultimately save your heirs a lot of time and money. And because no matter how much you pay for the estate plan, I guarantee the probate would have been 3, 4, 5 times as much. So yeah, certainly, we do a lot of high net worth planning in my firm. So if you get into where you have a taxable estate, certainly the costs are going to be more than people that just are under $6 million. Us poor people under $6 million that we just need to set up I don't want to say a basic plan, but just something that is going to avoid probate. It's really not going to break the bank. It's a few $1,000s and a lot of peace of mind, in my opinion.
Gotcha. Yeah, absolutely agree. Well, thank you so much for joining us and for all of this great information. I would love for you to tell us, maybe a quick little bit about the book that you wrote, and then also where our listeners can find you.
Sure. So I wrote the book for this exact reason, is I just want to get this information out for people, because I was doing a lot of seminars where, I started out doing the estate planning 101 seminars, and when I did estate planning for Snowbirds, I got such a passionate response from people. It sounds ridiculous, but it was estate planning. But I got such a response from people with, "Oh my God, thank you for this information. We're so happy to have it." So I thought, I can reach more people if I write the book. So I wrote the book that has a lot of this information that I've gone over today. Gets into a little bit more in depth about the tax planning and things like that. And, the book's available on Amazon if you want the hard copy. But, I'm not trying to sell books. So your listeners, if they reach out to me, I'm happy to send them a book. I've got plenty of them in my office. And if you like to read on the Kindle or on the computer, they can go to my personal website, bernardesstateplan.com, BERNARD, estateplan.com. And there's a free download of the book, and they can read it on the Kindle. And if they would like a hard copy of the book, I'm happy to send that to them. They can send me an email, dbernard, BERNARD, at Suffolk, SUFFOLK, law.com. And I'm happy to send them a copy. And, they can pass it along. I'm not trying to sell books. I'm just trying to get the information out there. And they can pass that along to whoever they'd like. And one less probate makes me happy.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, guys. Thanks for having me. I had a great time, and guys are doing a great service with this podcast. I appreciate it as a Snowbird attorney.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we want to hear from you. You can reach us on our Moving to Florida show hotline by dropping a voicemail or texting us to 407-900-5859 or drop us a DM on Facebook or Instagram at Moving to Florida Show. And for Twitter, our handle is at Moving to FL Show. If you'd like to connect with us, if you have any questions, or if you need a realtor in Florida, you can reach us at movingtofloridashow@gmail.com. Be sure to subscribe to the show if you like our content so that it would automatically download to your device and get you one step closer to moving to Florida.